Rare lioness gives birth minutes after ranger's arrival. Miracle happens. The heart-wrenching roar sliced through the dawn silence like a knife. Miguel Dominguez, a ranger with 15 years of experience at Tsavo East National Reserve, froze in his tracks. His senses, honed by years in the African savannah, told him this was no ordinary roar. It wasn't a threat, nor a hunting call, nor a territorial claim. It was a sound he had heard only a few times in his career. A female in distress, likely in complicated labor. Damn it, today of all days, he muttered to himself, changing direction. Miguel shouldn't have been there. His shift had ended an hour ago, and in 20 minutes, the small aircraft that would take him to Nairobi was departing. From there, he would catch his annual flight to Mexico City, where his family awaited him after 10 months apart. But something in that roar instantly changed his priorities. He advanced cautiously through the vegetation. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the savannah in golden hues and casting long shadows. Another roar, closer and more anguished. Miguel stopped and peered through his binoculars. What he saw accelerated his pulse. About 200 meters away, in a small clearing surrounded by acacia trees, lay a solitary lioness. But not just any lioness. Even at that distance, Miguel could distinguish the feature that made her unique. Her extremely pale coat, almost white, with just a hint of gold. It was Nalah, the only albino lioness documented in Tsavo. Albinism was extremely rare in wild big cats. Nalah had been a phenomenon since her first sighting 5 years ago. Scientists had tracked, studied, and protected her as best they could without interfering with her wildlife. She had survived against all odds, despite her coloration putting her at a disadvantage for hunting. She had even managed to integrate into a pride. And now she was alone, clearly in distress. Miguel activated his radio. "Tsavo Boss, this is Dominguez. I have visual on Nalah 2 kilometers east of Post 5. She appears to be in labor and having problems. I need the veterinary team. Over." "Dominguez, this is base. Understood. The veterinary team is attending to an elephant emergency in the south. Estimated arrival time, 1 hour. Over." Miguel checked his watch. His plane would leave in 15 minutes. "Base, requesting permission to approach and assess the situation. Over." There was a prolonged silence. The protocol was strict. No intervention in natural processes, especially births. Nature had to take its course. "Dominguez, permission denied. Wait for the veterinary team. Do not approach the animal. Over." Miguel looked through his binoculars again. Nalah was trying to stand up, only to collapse again. Her breathing was visibly labored, and a dark liquid stained the grass beneath her. "Sorry, base," he murmured as he turned off the radio. "But I can't just watch." With deliberately slow movements, Miguel approached. Each step calculated, each rustle of grass measured. At 100 meters, he stopped and took a small bottle of lavender essence from his backpack. Years ago, a Maasai veterinarian had taught him that this scent could calm big cats, something about how it affected their olfactory receptors. He dabbed a few drops on his wrists and clothes. At 50 meters, Nalah turned her head toward him. Her eyes, a deep amber that dramatically contrasted with her pale coat, fixed on Miguel. There was no aggression in them, only pain and something the ranger could only describe as pleading. "Easy, girl," whispered Miguel. "I'm here to help." What the Mexican didn't know, couldn't know, was that Nalah recognized him. 3 years earlier, when she was a young lioness rejected by several prides due to her unusual coloration, Miguel had indirectly intervened in her fate. He had found Nalah dehydrated and had discreetly guided her to a waterhole, maintaining his distance but ensuring she drank. Afterward, for weeks, he had left small prey near her until she regained her strength and was finally accepted by a pride. Lions don't forget those who help them. At 20 meters, Miguel stopped and slowly crouched down. He observed Nalah's condition more clearly. Her distended belly visibly contracted. There was blood, more than there should be in a normal birth. And something more alarming, he could see part of a cub's paw emerging, but in an incorrect position, a complicated birth due to the cub's poor positioning. Without intervention, both mother and offspring would die. Miguel faced the biggest dilemma of his career. The non-intervention policy existed for good reasons. Nature was brutal but effective, and every human intervention altered delicate balances. But Nalah wasn't just any lioness. She was possibly the only wild albino lioness documented in East Africa. Her genetic and scientific value was incalculable, and her cubs, if they inherited her condition, would be even more valuable for understanding this rare mutation. But beyond all that, something in Nalah's eyes moved him on a deeply human level. "They're going to fire me," he muttered as he opened his backpack and took out his emergency kit. Miguel had assisted cattle births in his youth in Mexico and had received basic veterinary training as part of his job. He had never attended to a big cat, but the basic principles were similar. He approached the final meters crawling on his belly, a submissive movement intended to show Nalah he wasn't a threat. The lioness kept her eyes fixed on him but made no move to attack. "I'm going to help you," he said softly as he approached the lioness's side. "Okay, but I need you to trust me." Nalah emitted a guttural sound, a mixture of growl and moan. Miguel positioned himself near her rear, where he could clearly see the problem. The cub was in a breech position, with a bent hind leg blocking the birth canal. With shaking but determined hands, Miguel took a bottle of disinfectant from his kit and bathed his hands. Then, taking the biggest risk of his life, he brought his hands to Nalah's body. "Yet forgive me, but this will hurt," he warned, knowing the lioness didn't understand his words, but hoping she would catch his tone. With extreme delicacy, he partially inserted a hand to reposition the cub's paw. Nalah roared in pain, but miraculously didn't attack. Her instinct seemed to tell her this human was helping. Time seemed to stand still as Miguel worked, his forehead beaded with sweat that fell into his eyes, momentarily blurring his vision. His hands acted almost by instinct, guided by memories of his youth and a basic understanding of animal anatomy. After what seemed like an eternity but was just minutes, he managed to reposition the cub. "Almost there," he murmured. "One more push." As if understanding, Nalah pushed with a powerful contraction. The cub began to slide out. Miguel held it gently, helping in the process but allowing nature to do most of the work. Finally, the miracle happened. A small cub, incredibly pale like its mother, emerged completely. Miguel held it for a moment, amazed at the perfection of the tiny creature. "You look just like your mom, little one," he whispered as he quickly cleaned the membranes covering the cub's face. The little one wasn't breathing. Carefully, Miguel massaged its tiny chest and cleaned its nose and mouth. For a terrible moment, he thought they had been too late. Then, the cub took its first breath of air and emitted a tiny sound between a mew and a growl. Life had triumphed. With still trembling hands, Miguel placed the cub near Nalah's muzzle. The lioness immediately began to lick her offspring, cleaning and stimulating it. To his surprise, Nalah emitted another groan. Her belly contracted again. "Another one?" murmured Miguel, amazed. Indeed, a second cub began to emerge. This birth was faster and without complications. The second cub, unlike the first, had normal golden fur. A third followed minutes later, also with normal coloration. After the births, when the cubs were nursing vigorously and Nalah seemed stable, Miguel finally activated his radio to report what had happened. The response was immediate and filled with both amazement and indignation. When Miguel arrived at base, expecting to be fired, he was instead met with a surprising turnaround. The director, initially severe, softened when conservation officials recognized the scientific value of his actions. Instead of termination, Miguel was assigned as the principal guardian of Nalah's territory and offered specialized training. 1 year later, Nalah's story, and that of her albino cub, now nicknamed Ghost, had become a worldwide conservation phenomenon. National Geographic had published an extensive article, including the dramatic story of the birth assisted by Miguel. The Mexican ranger, now trained in basic veterinary assistance, had been promoted to specialist in rare species monitoring. In his new capacity, Miguel had the task of discreetly following Nalah's pride, documenting the development of the young albino, who was thriving against all odds. The most extraordinary moment came on a particularly hot afternoon when Nalah, who normally kept her distance from reserve vehicles like any wild lion, separated from her group and deliberately walked toward the jeep where Miguel was. At a prudent distance, the lioness stopped. Behind her, young Ghost followed curiously. Mother and son paused, looking directly at Miguel. Then, as on that day a year before, Nalah slightly bowed her head before turning around and returning to her pride, her albino son following closely. Scientists would debate whether this behavior was coincidence, conditioning, or something more. Miguel didn't need scientific explanations. At that moment, under the relentless African sun, thousands of miles from his native Mexico, he understood there were forms of communication that transcended species and words. The miracle wasn't just saving Nalah and her cubs that day. The true miracle was the invisible bond that now existed, a bridge between two worlds that should never have touched, but which, thanks to a moment of compassion and courage, were now connected forever.